My daughter-in-law humiliated me at her wedding, demanding I hand over my house to her and my son. When I refused, she slapped me in front of all the guests. So I calmly picked up my phone and made 2 calls that would change everything. What happened next shocked everyone at that wedding, including my son. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I'd set the table with Martha's good china, hoping this dinner would mark a new chapter for our small family. The Lenox pattern we'd received as a wedding gift 37 years ago gleamed under the dining room chandelier, each piece carefully arranged with the precision that 4 decades of engineering had ingrained in me. Daniel was bringing Victoria home for the first time since their engagement announcement, and I wanted everything to be perfect. The roast had been in the oven since 3 o'clock, filling the house with the kind of savory aroma that Martha used to say made any place feel like home. I'd prepared her famous honey-glazed carrots and those garlic mashed potatoes Daniel had loved since he was 10 years old. This wasn't just dinner, it was my attempt to welcome the woman my son had chosen to spend his life with. At 6:30 sharp, I heard Daniel's key in the front door, followed by voices in the entryway. My heart hammered with the nervous energy of a man who desperately wanted to do right by his only child. "Dad, we're here." Daniel called out, his voice carrying that particular brightness he'd had since childhood when he was especially excited about something. I smoothed my tie and walked to greet them, finding Daniel helping Victoria out of a sleek black coat. She was undeniably beautiful, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she put considerable effort into her presentation. Her eyes, however, weren't looking at Daniel or me. They were scanning the living room with an intensity that made me pause. "Victoria, welcome to our home," I said, extending my hand with what I hoped was genuine warmth. "I'm so glad we finally have the chance to really talk." Her handshake was firm, professional, but her gaze continued its systematic sweep of the room. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Walker. What a substantial house you have here." Something in her tone made the compliment feel more like an appraisal, but I pushed the thought aside. First impressions could be deceiving, and I owed it to Daniel to give her every benefit of the doubt. "Please call me Norman. And thank you, Martha and I were lucky to find this place when Daniel was just a baby. 34 years we've been here." 34 years, Victoria repeated, her eyes lingering on the antique secretary desk that had belonged to Martha's grandmother. "That's quite an investment. I imagine the property values in this neighborhood have appreciated considerably." Daniel laughed nervously. "Victoria's got a head for business. Always thinking about investments and market trends." "How practical," I replied, though something cold was beginning to settle in my stomach. "Shall we head to the dining room? I hope you're hungry." As we moved through the house, I noticed Victoria's attention to detail, the way she noted the Persian rug Martha and I had bought for our 10th anniversary, how her gaze lingered on the grandfather clock that had belonged to my father, the subtle way she counted the bedrooms as we passed the hallway. Over dinner, I tried to steer the conversation toward getting to know her better. "Daniel tells me you work in marketing. That must be exciting." "It pays the bills," Victoria said, cutting her roast beef with surgical precision. "Though I'm more interested in long-term security than excitement. A person has to think about their future, don't they?" "Absolutely. Martha and I always believed in planning ahead." I gestured around the dining room. "We saved for 3 years just to afford the down payment on this place." Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "And now it's just you here. All this space for one person." The observation hit differently than I'd expected. There was something calculating in her tone, as if she were solving a math problem rather than making conversation. "I suppose it is more house than I need these days," I admitted, "but it's home. Every room holds memories." "Well, memories don't really need physical space, do they?" Victoria's smile was perfectly pleasant, but her words felt like tiny needles. "I mean, young couples starting out, they need room to grow to build their own memories." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Victoria, Dad loves this house." "Of course he does. I'm just saying it seems like such a waste. All those empty bedrooms, that big kitchen. It must be expensive to maintain 2 heating, cooling, property taxes." She wasn't wrong about the expenses, but the way she itemized them felt invasive, presumptuous. I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of the woman who had captured my son's heart so completely. What I saw instead was someone conducting a very thorough inventory. "The house is manageable," I said carefully. "I've been fortunate with my retirement planning." Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest. "Oh, you must have had an excellent pension plan. Engineers do well for themselves, don't they? Especially after 35 years with the same company." Now, I was certain this wasn't casual conversation. These were targeted questions delivered with the precision of someone gathering specific information. But why? The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of Victoria's pointed observations about the underutilized space and gentle suggestions about how freeing it might be for me to downsize to something more appropriate. Each comment felt like a small invasion, a presumption about my life that she had no right to make. After they left, I stood in my kitchen loading Martha's good china into the dishwasher, my hands trembling slightly. 37 years, those plates had graced our table for special occasions, and tonight they'd witnessed something that felt deeply wrong. Victoria hadn't asked about Martha, hadn't shown interest in Daniel's childhood, hadn't tried to connect with me as a person. Instead, she'd conducted what felt like a real estate assessment disguised as dinner conversation. I thought about the way she'd looked at everything, not with the warmth of someone hoping to join a family, but with the cold calculation of someone appraising assets. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe grief had made me paranoid. But as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria saw my home, my life, and me not as a family to join, but as resources to be acquired. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, or maybe it was the aftertaste of Victoria's words still lingering in my mind. I sat at my kitchen table with my engineering notebook, the same type I'd used for 35 years to solve complex problems, and began doing what came naturally, analyzing data. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote Victoria Sterling, initial assessment, and drew a line down the middle. On the left side, concerning behaviors. On the right, possible explanations. The left column filled quickly. Her systematic evaluation of my house. Questions about property values and maintenance costs. Comments about wasted space and young couples needing room to grow. The presumptuous suggestion that memories didn't require physical space. Each behavior was specific, measurable, and troubling when viewed as a pattern. The right column proved more challenging. Wedding nerves, practical nature, genuine concern for an aging widower, living alone. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but my engineer's mind kept returning to the data points that didn't support innocent explanations. Martha used to tease me about my methodical approach to everything, but she'd also relied on it during our 37 years together. When something doesn't add up, Norman, she'd say, there's usually a reason why. At 9:30, I called Daniel at his office, hoping to discuss wedding plans, and maybe gently share some of my observations from the previous evening. Hey Dad, what's up? Daniel sounded distracted, keyboards clicking in the background. I wanted to thank you both for coming to dinner last night. It was wonderful to spend time with Victoria. She had a great time too. Really appreciated how welcoming you were. There was something in his tone that suggested he'd been expecting a different conversation. She seems very observant about real estate matters. Daniel's typing stopped. What do you mean by that? Just that she had quite a few questions about the house. Property values, maintenance costs. I wondered if you two were thinking about buying something in the neighborhood. Dad. Daniel's voice carried a warning edge I recognized from his teenage years. Please tell me you're not going to start criticizing Victoria. I'm not criticizing anyone's son. I'm just, because she mentioned you might have some concerns about our relationship. She said older people sometimes have trouble accepting change. Older people. The phrase stung more than it should have. Daniel, I simply noticed she seemed very interested in the financial aspects of I have to go, Dad. We're in the middle of something important here. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat staring at the phone, replaying the conversation. Victoria had anticipated my concerns and already positioned herself as the victim of an interfering father-in-law. That level of strategic thinking suggested a mind that planned several moves ahead. Around noon, I heard a knock at my front door. Helen Carter stood on my porch, holding a plate of her famous oatmeal cookies, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the spring breeze. Thought you might like some company, she said, with the straightforward warmth that had made her a beloved elementary school teacher for 40 years. Plus, I made too many cookies again. Helen had been my neighbor for 15 years, ever since she'd moved in after her husband's death. She'd been a godsend during Martha's illness, bringing casseroles and offering the kind of practical support that kept me functional during the darkest period of my life. We settled in my living room with coffee and cookies, the same room Victoria had surveyed so thoroughly the night before. So, Helen said, her blue eyes twinkling with curiosity, how did dinner go with Daniel's young lady? Interesting, I replied carefully. She's certainly focused. Helen laughed. Norman Walker, you've never been good at hiding your feelings. What's bothering you about her? I found myself describing the previous evening Victoria's systematic questions, Her comments about wasted space, the way she'd inventoried my possessions like a real estate appraiser. Helen listened with the patient attention she'd once given to concerned parents during teacher conferences. 40 years in elementary education teaches you to recognize certain behaviors, Helen said when I finished. Some children see opportunity where others see friendship. They calculate rather than connect. But I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just resistant to change, like she suggested to Daniel. Helen set down her coffee cup with a decisive clink. Norman, you welcomed that girl into your home with Martha's best china. You cooked for hours to make her feel special. That's not resistance to change, that's a father trying to love his son's choice. She leaned forward, her expression serious. But some people see generosity as weakness, kindness as opportunity. So what do I do? Daniel's already defensive about her. If I push too hard, I'll lose him completely. You do what good engineers do, Helen said with a knowing smile. You gather more data before drawing conclusions. But you do it carefully, methodically. And you trust your instincts, they're usually right. After Helen left, I sat in my workshop among the precise tools that had defined my career. Calipers for exact measurements, levels for determining true alignment, instruments designed to reveal what couldn't be seen with casual observation. Victoria Sterling required the same methodical analysis I'd once applied to structural problems. If she was genuinely interested in joining our family, careful observation would reveal behaviors consistent with that goal. If she had other motives, those would become apparent too. I pulled out a small notebook and wrote documentation protocol on the first page. If I was going to protect Daniel from what might be a serious mistake, I needed evidence, not suspicions. Facts, not feelings. The decision felt both necessary and uncomfortable. I'd never spied on anyone in my life, never violated someone's privacy or questioned their motives so systematically. But I'd also never felt such a strong protective instinct about someone I loved. Martha's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes love means doing the difficult thing, Norman, even when it hurts. I opened my laptop and began researching discrete surveillance equipment. If Victoria Sterling was planning to hurt my son, she'd discovered that this older person had more resources and determination than she'd calculated. The data collection phase was about to begin. 35 years of engineering had taught me that systems reveal their flaws under careful observation. Complex problems required methodical analysis, precise documentation, and above all, patience. If Victoria Sterling was deceiving my son, systematic surveillance would expose the truth. I spent the first week learning her patterns. Victoria worked at a downtown marketing firm, arriving each morning at 8:30 sharp and leaving between 5:15 and 5:45. She drove a silver Honda Civic license plate, carefully noted in my observation log. Her lunch breaks lasted exactly 1 hour, usually spent at the coffee shop across from her building. My engineering background proved invaluable for this type of work. I approached surveillance like any complex project, identify variables, establish baselines, document anomalies. I purchased a small digital camera with a zoom lens and created a filing system that would have impressed my former colleagues. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening during my second week of observation. I'd positioned myself in the parking lot of a strip mall across from Victoria's office building, using my car's tinted windows for concealment. At 5:37, she emerged from the building, but instead of heading toward her usual route home, she turned east toward the restaurant district. I followed at a careful distance, my heart hammering with the strange excitement of finally gathering real data. Victoria pulled into the parking lot of Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant I'd taken Martha to for our anniversary several times. She didn't go inside immediately. Instead, she sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror, reapplying lipstick, with the careful attention of someone preparing for an important meeting. At 5:55, a white pickup truck pulled into the space beside her Honda. The driver was a man I'd never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what appeared to be a mechanic's uniform with Thompson embroidered on the chest pocket. He looked to be in his early 30s with a kind of honest, weathered face that suggested someone who worked with his hands for a living. What happened next made my stomach drop. Victoria emerged from her car and walked directly into this stranger's arms. Not a polite greeting between acquaintances, but the intimate embrace of two people who knew each other well. Very well. She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her with the familiarity of established lovers. I managed to take several photographs through my camera's zoom lens, my hands surprisingly steady despite the shock coursing through my system. The images were clear, undeniable Victoria Sterling, my son's fiancée, in the passionate embrace of another man. They walked into Marcello's hand in hand, completely absorbed in each other's company. I sat in my car for several minutes, processing what I'd witnessed. This wasn't a chance encounter or a moment of weakness. The way they moved together, the comfort level between them, suggested a relationship that had been developing over time. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours, documenting their dinner through the restaurant's large windows. They sat at a corner table, leaning toward each other with the body language of intimate conversation. Victoria laughed frequently, touching the man's hand across the table, displaying the kind of animated affection I'd never seen her show with Daniel. At 8:15 they emerged together, walking slowly to their cars like people reluctant to end their evening. Another embrace longer this time, and what appeared to be plans being made for future meetings. The man Thompson, according to his uniform, watched Victoria drive away before getting into his own truck. I followed him for several miles, noting his route to a modest apartment complex on the east side of town. The license plate on his truck led to a quick internet search that revealed his full name, Marcus Thompson, age 31, employed at Henderson's Auto Repair. Back home, I spread the evening's photographs across my dining room table. The evidence was irrefutable. Victoria wasn't just having dinner with a friend, she was conducting what appeared to be a serious romantic relationship behind my son's back. But as I studied the images more carefully, something else troubled me. The level of comfort between Victoria and Marcus suggested this wasn't a recent development. The way she'd prepared for their meeting, the familiarity of their physical interaction, the obvious planning involved in their rendezvous, all of it pointed to a systematic deception that had been ongoing for some time. I opened my investigation notebook and began creating a timeline. Victoria and Daniel had been dating for 6 months, engaged for 3. If her relationship with Marcus predated the engagement, she'd been deceiving Daniel from the very beginning. If it had developed afterward, she was actively cheating while planning their wedding. Either scenario was devastating for my son. More troubling was the realization that someone capable of maintaining this level of deception might not be limiting herself to just 2 relationships. The methodical way Victoria had compartmentalized her time, the strategic planning evident in her meeting with Marcus, suggested a mind that could juggle multiple complex situations simultaneously. I stared at the photographs until my eyes burned, trying to understand how Daniel had missed the signs of such elaborate dishonesty. But then I remembered my own first marriage, how completely I'd been fooled by Rebecca's charm until the day she announced she was leaving for someone with better financial prospects. Love made people blind to uncomfortable truths. It was my job as Daniel's father to see clearly when he couldn't. I locked the photographs in my desk drawer and began planning the next phase of my investigation. If Victoria was capable of deceiving Daniel this thoroughly, I needed to understand the complete scope of her dishonesty before deciding how to proceed. One thing was certain: my son was about to marry a woman who was living a double life. The only question now was how many lives she was actually living. What I discovered next made me understand I wasn't dealing with simple infidelity, but something far more calculated and systematic than I'd ever imagined. Over the following week, I expanded my surveillance operation with the methodical precision that had defined my engineering career. I created detailed schedules mapping Victoria's movements with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to structural load calculations. What emerged was a pattern so deliberate it took my breath away. Victoria wasn't just cheating on Daniel, she was operating 3 completely separate romantic relationships with military precision. Sundays and Mondays belonged to Daniel. She was the devoted fiancée, planning their wedding, discussing their future, playing the role of loving partner with Academy Award-level performance. Tuesdays and Thursdays were Marcus Thompson's days. I documented their routine dinner at various restaurants, visits to his apartment, weekend trips that she explained to Daniel as girls' weekends or work conferences. But it was Fridays and Saturdays that revealed the true scope of Victoria's deception. I followed her to a different part of town, to a trendy sports bar where she met yet another man. This one was younger than Marcus, maybe 28, with the polished appearance of someone in retail management. I watched through my camera's zoom lens as Victoria greeted him with the same intimate affection she'd shown Marcus, the same practiced charm she used with Daniel. His name, I learned through careful observation of their interactions, was Ryan Mitchell. Where Marcus represented blue-collar stability and Daniel offered long-term financial security, Ryan appeared to serve a different function entirely. He showered Victoria with expensive gifts, jewelry, designer handbags, electronics that probably cost more than his monthly salary. I spent hours in my car documenting their relationship, photographing Ryan's obvious devotion, his willingness to spend money he likely couldn't afford on a woman who was simultaneously engaged to another man. The waste of his genuine emotions, his financial resources, his trust made me physically sick. But the most disturbing discovery came when I overheard one of Victoria's phone conversations during what I'd learned was her coordination time. Wednesday evenings, when she managed the logistics of her triple life. I'd positioned myself near her apartment building using a small parabolic microphone I'd purchased online when she stepped onto her balcony to take a call. The conversation revealed a level of calculation that chilled me to the bone. "The timeline is perfect," she was saying to someone. "Daniel's completely committed, and his father's retirement portfolio is substantial. The house alone is worth $400,000, maybe more in this market. My house." She was discussing my house like a commodity to be acquired. "Marcus is useful for now, but he's strictly temporary. Ryan's got access to retail credit lines that could be helpful short term. But Daniel's the long-term investment. Once we're married, I'll have legal standing to influence family financial decisions." I sat in my car, hands trembling as I processed what I'd heard. This wasn't just about maintaining multiple relationships for emotional or physical gratification. Victoria was conducting a systematic financial exploitation scheme, using 3 different men as resources while targeting Daniel specifically for his inheritance prospects. She'd researched my assets. She knew about my retirement savings, my house value, my investment portfolio. The wedding wasn't the culmination of a love story, it was a business transaction designed to give her legal access to generational wealth. Over the next few days, I documented the full scope of her operation. Victoria had created detailed compartmentalization that would have impressed intelligence professionals. Each man received different explanations for her limited availability. Daniel believed she was busy with work projects. Marcus thought she was caring for a sick relative. Ryan was told she was completing a graduate degree program. She maintained separate social media accounts, used different phone numbers for different relationships, and had created elaborate scheduling systems to ensure her 3 lives never intersected. The level of organization required for such deception suggested someone with sociopathic tendencies, a complete absence of empathy for the people she was manipulating. But what horrified me most was understanding how perfectly she'd chosen her victims. Daniel offered financial security and social respectability. Marcus provided emotional stability and physical affection without financial expectations. Ryan supplied expensive gifts and entertainment without demanding too much time commitment. Each man was fulfilling a specific need while being systematically deceived about the nature of their relationship. None of them knew they were sharing Victoria with others. Each believed he was special, chosen, loved exclusively. As I organized my evidence files that evening, I found myself thinking about the 3 men whose lives Victoria was destroying. Daniel, my beloved son, planning a future with someone who saw him as a financial opportunity. Marcus working overtime at the auto repair shop to afford gifts for a woman who was using him. Ryan probably maxing out credit cards to impress someone who viewed his generosity as a resource to be exploited. None of them deserved what she was doing to them. I locked the evidence in my desk drawer and sat in the growing darkness of my study, surrounded by the photographs and documentation that revealed the complete scope of Victoria Sterling's deception. She wasn't just a cheating fiancé, she was a predator who had identified vulnerable targets and was systematically exploiting their emotions, their resources, and their trust. The wedding was 3 weeks away. In 3 weeks, she would legally bind herself to my son while continuing to manipulate 2 other innocent men. The thought of Daniel standing at an altar, promising his life to someone capable of such calculated cruelty, made my decision crystal clear. Victoria Sterling had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd underestimated the protective instincts of a father who had the skills, resources, and determination to expose the truth. The question now wasn't whether to stop her, but how to do it in a way that would save all 3 of her victims while ensuring she could never hurt anyone else again. The evidence spread across my desk like blueprints for the most important project of my life. 3 weeks of systematic investigation had produced a comprehensive dossier that would have impressed my former colleagues at the engineering firm. Photographs arranged chronologically, timeline charts mapping Victoria's movements with mathematical precision, financial research documenting her calculated targeting of my family's assets. I'd approached this investigation the same way I'd once analyzed structural problems, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to every detail that might prove crucial under pressure. Now, I needed to apply that same systematic thinking to the most delicate challenge I'd ever faced, exposing Victoria's deception without destroying my relationship with Daniel in the process. The first step was organization. I created 3 separate files, one for each of Victoria's victims. Daniel's file contained evidence of her financial scheming and timeline inconsistencies. Marcus's file documented their relationship alongside proof of her engagement to Daniel. Ryan's file showed his expensive gifts and emotional investment in a woman who was systematically deceiving him. Each file told the same story from a different angle. Victoria Sterling was a predator who had identified vulnerable targets and was exploiting their trust for personal gain. But evidence alone wouldn't be sufficient. I needed a strategy that would minimize collateral damage while ensuring the truth couldn't be dismissed or explained away. This required the kind of careful planning that had defined my most successful engineering projects. Around noon, Helen Carter knocked on my door carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd noticed unusual activity in the neighborhood. "You've been burning the midnight oil lately," she observed, settling into my living room chair with the comfortable familiarity of a longtime friend. "The lights in your study have been on until all hours." I found myself grateful for her visit. Helen's 40 years of teaching experience had given her insights into human behavior that complemented my analytical approach to problems. "I've been working on a project," I said carefully, "something that requires a lot of documentation and planning." Helen studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades reading between the lines of what children and parents actually meant when they spoke. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Daniel's young lady, would it?" The relief of having someone who understood was overwhelming. I found myself describing my discoveries: Victoria's systematic deception, the 3 separate relationships, the financial manipulation scheme targeting my family's assets. Helen listened with the patient attention she'd once given to concerned parents during teacher conferences. 40 years in elementary education teaches you to recognize certain patterns," Helen said when I finished. "Some children learn early that charm can be weaponized, that adults will give them what they want, if they say the right things, show the right emotions. But how do I protect Daniel without losing him completely? If I confront him directly, he'll think I'm just an interfering father who can't accept his choices." Helen set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Norman, you're not trying to control Daniel's life. You're trying to save it from someone who would destroy it systematically. There's a profound difference." She leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd guided countless families through difficult decisions. "Sometimes love means doing the difficult thing even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. That girl isn't just breaking hearts, she's destroying lives with calculated precision. Your son deserves to know the truth before he legally binds himself to someone who sees him as a financial opportunity." After Helen left, I returned to my study with renewed moral clarity. This wasn't about my personal feelings toward Victoria, or my reluctance to see Daniel marry someone I didn't like. This was about protecting 3 innocent men from systematic exploitation by someone who lacked basic human empathy. That evening, Daniel called with news about wedding preparations. His voice carried an undertone of stress I hadn't noticed before. "Victoria's been working late a lot lately," he mentioned during our conversation. "Big project at work, apparently. Sometimes I feel like I barely see her anymore." I chose my words carefully. Wedding planning can be stressful for couples. Are you both handling the pressure well, I guess? It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't really know her schedule anymore. She's always busy with something: work, wedding planning, family obligations. I suggested we spend more time together, but she says I'm being clingy. Clingy. Victoria was using psychological manipulation to make Daniel doubt his own reasonable desire to spend time with his fiancée. The calculated cruelty of it made my jaw clench. Relationships require balance, son. Both people should feel valued and prioritized. "Yeah, I know. I'm probably just overthinking things." "Pre-wedding nerves, right? Probably," I agreed, though I could hear in his voice that Daniel's subconscious was beginning to recognize patterns his conscious mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. After we hung up, I sat in my study reviewing the complete scope of my investigation. 3 weeks until the wedding. 3 weeks to finalize a plan that would expose Victoria's deception in a way that would be undeniable, public enough to prevent manipulation or gaslighting, and timed perfectly to save all 3 of her victims. I opened a fresh notebook and began sketching the framework for what would either be the most important intervention of my life or the action that permanently damaged my relationship with my son. The engineering approach that had guided my career suggested a simple principle when dealing with structural failure. You don't patch the problem, you expose it completely, and rebuild from a foundation of truth. Victoria Sterling had constructed her life on a foundation of systematic deception. It was time to conduct a stress test that would reveal every crack, every weakness, every point of failure in her elaborate construction. The master plan was beginning to take shape. 2 days before the wedding, I discovered Victoria's plans went far beyond deception. She intended to systematically isolate and exploit my son in ways that would have destroyed his life piece by piece. I'd been conducting what I planned as my final surveillance session, positioned in the parking lot of a coffee shop near Victoria's apartment building. My investigation had reached the point where I understood her patterns completely, but something told me to maintain observation until the very end. That instinct proved crucial. At 7:15 on Thursday evening, Victoria stepped onto her apartment balcony to take a phone call. I'd learned that she used this location for her most sensitive conversations, far enough from neighbors to avoid being overheard, or so she thought. My parabolic microphone, positioned carefully in my car, captured every word with crystal clarity. "The timeline is perfect," she was saying to someone whose voice I couldn't distinguish. "2 more days, and everything will be legally binding. Daniel's completely committed, and I've already started laying the groundwork for the next phase." Next phase. The words sent ice through my veins. His father's the real obstacle, but that's manageable once we're married. I've been documenting his age-related concerns, his tendency toward paranoia about my motives. It won't be difficult to convince Daniel that the old man needs professional care. Professional care? She was planning to have me declared incompetent. The house is the primary asset. 400,000 minimum, probably closer to 500 in this market. Once Daniel has power of attorney for his father's affairs, we can liquidate everything and relocate somewhere with better opportunities. I sat in my car, hands trembling as I processed what I was hearing. Victoria wasn't just planning to steal my son, she intended to systematically strip away everything I'd built over a lifetime of work. My home, my independence, my relationship with Daniel, even my mental competency would become weapons in her arsenal. Marcus and Ryan are useful for now, but they'll need to be phased out gradually after the honeymoon. I can't risk exposure from multiple relationships once I'm focusing on the long-term financial strategy. The casual way she discussed discarding 2 men who genuinely cared for her revealed a level of sociopathic calculation that made my stomach turn. Marcus working overtime to buy her gifts. Ryan probably going into debt to impress her. Both of them would be discarded like used tools once they'd served their purpose. Daniel's already showing signs of dependency. I've been gradually isolating him from his social circle, making him question his friendships, convincing him that his father's concerns are signs of jealousy and loneliness. By the time we're back from our honeymoon, he'll be completely reliant on my emotional support. Dependency, isolation, emotional manipulation. Victoria was describing a textbook case of psychological abuse planned and executed with the precision of a military operation. The beauty of it is that everyone will see Daniel as the devoted son who's taking care of his aging father. No one will question the decisions we make about Norman's living situation or financial management. Elderly care facilities are expensive, but they're also very convenient for families who need to access assets quickly. She was planning to have me institutionalized so she could steal my life savings. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering details that made me understand the complete scope of her scheme. Victoria had researched elder care laws, power of attorney procedures, and asset liquidation strategies with the same thoroughness she'd applied to managing her multiple relationships. When she finally ended the call and went back inside, I sat in the growing darkness of the parking lot, my mind reeling from what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about protecting Daniel from a cheating fiancé. Victoria Sterling was a predator who had identified our family as a target for systematic financial and emotional exploitation. She'd planned every detail the wedding would give her legal standing as Daniel's wife, which she'd leveraged to gain influence over family decisions. She'd gradually isolate Daniel from friends and family, making him emotionally dependent on her support. She'd manipulate him into believing I needed professional care, then use his power of attorney to liquidate my assets. Within a year, maybe 2, I'd be in a nursing home. My house would be sold, my savings would be gone, and Daniel would be trapped in an abusive marriage with someone who saw him as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. The most chilling aspect was how perfectly she'd positioned herself. Every move Daniel made to protect me or help with my care would actually be advancing Victoria's scheme. She'd weaponized his love for me against both of us. I drove home through the quiet suburban streets where I'd lived for 34 years, past houses where neighbors had raised their children, grown old, built lives of meaning and dignity. Victoria Sterling intended to strip all of that away from me, while convincing my son that he was acting out of love and responsibility. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I was a helpless elderly man whose concerns could be dismissed as paranoia or jealousy. She'd underestimated the protective instincts of a father who had the skills, resources, and determination to expose her completely. In my study that night, I reviewed the complete scope of my investigation one final time. 3 weeks of systematic surveillance had revealed a predator who was targeting not just Daniel, but our entire family's future. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and damning. Saturday's wedding would be Victoria's moment of triumph, the legal ceremony that would give her the standing she needed to begin the systematic destruction of my son's life and the theft of everything I'd worked to build. Unless I stopped her first. The decision crystallized with the clarity that comes from moral certainty. I wouldn't let Victoria Sterling destroy my family. I wouldn't let her turn Daniel into a weapon against me. I wouldn't let her steal the future I'd spent a lifetime creating. Saturday would indeed be a day of revelation, but the truth that emerged wouldn't be the one Victoria was expecting. The wedding was perfect in every detail, except the one that mattered most, the bride's character. I sat in the third row of white folding chairs, watching Daniel stand at the altar in his navy suit, his face radiant with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen since he was a child on Christmas morning. The spring afternoon was flawless, clear skies, gentle breeze, the scent of blooming dogwood trees, creating the perfect backdrop for what should have been the most joyful day of his life. Victoria looked stunning in her white gown, playing the role of blushing bride with Academy Award-level performance. As she walked down the aisle, I saw her eyes sweep across the gathered guests, cataloging faces, assessing the value of gifts, calculating the social and financial connections represented in our small family gathering. Even now, even at her own wedding, she was working angles. The ceremony proceeded with traditional beauty. Daniel's voice cracked with emotion as he recited his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish the woman who had spent months planning his systematic exploitation. Victoria's responses were pitch perfect, delivered with just the right combination of joy and sincerity to convince everyone present that they were witnessing true love. I maintained my composure throughout the entire service, though my jacket pocket felt heavy with the weight of my phone and the contact numbers I'd carefully programmed the night before. Marcus Thompson, Ryan Mitchell, two innocent men who deserved to know the truth about the woman they both believed loved them exclusively. During the reception, Victoria's behavior shifted noticeably. The demure facade she'd maintained during our previous encounters dissolved into something more aggressive, more entitled. Success had made her careless. "Norman," she said, approaching me at the gift table where I'd been standing quietly observing the celebration. Her voice carried none of the sweetness she'd used during our dinner months ago. "We need to discuss something important." The crowd had thinned around us, most guests mingling near the bar or dance floor. Victoria had chosen this moment, deliberately creating the privacy she needed for whatever she was planning. Of course, Victoria. "What's on your mind?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a tone I'd never heard her use before, cold, calculating, stripped of pretense. "Daniel and I have been talking about our future living arrangements. Your house, it's perfect for newlyweds, and frankly, you don't need all that space anymore." The audacity was breathtaking, even though I'd been expecting something like this. "I'm sorry, but that's my home. I won't be giving it up." Her face flushed with irritation, the mask slipping completely. "Won't be giving it up. You're old and alone, Norman. What do you possibly need 4 bedrooms for? It's selfish to hoard resources when young families need them." "My answer is no, Victoria. Maybe this will change your mind." The slap cracked across my cheek like a gunshot. The sound carried across the reception area, causing dozens of heads to turn toward us. My face stung, but I remained perfectly still, letting the moment register with every witness present. Daniel materialized beside us within seconds, his face flushed with confusion and embarrassment. "What's happening here, Victoria? Why did you hit my father?" "He's being completely unreasonable about the house situation," she snapped, apparently unaware that assaulting an elderly man at her own wedding reception might not reflect well on her character. I tried to discuss it rationally, but he's being stubborn and selfish. I reached calmly into my jacket and withdrew my phone, maintaining steady eye contact with Victoria, while Daniel stared between us in bewilderment. "I think it's time everyone learned the truth about who you really are," I said quietly, my thumb moving across the phone screen with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice carried the first note of genuine concern I'd ever heard from her. Making a couple of calls, I replied, sending the first prepared message to Marcus Thompson. You'll see. The second message went to Ryan Mitchell, identical in urgency, both designed to bring Victoria's secret life crashing into her public one. Marcus, emergency, at Riverside Gardens wedding venue. Victoria's been in an accident and keeps asking for you specifically. Please come immediately. Ryan, urgent situation at Riverside Gardens. Victoria fell and hurt herself at a wedding. She's conscious but shaken and asking for you by name. Please hurry. Both messages exploited their genuine care for Victoria while positioning them to arrive at the wedding reception simultaneously. The truth would reveal itself without requiring explanation from me. They should be here in about 20 minutes, I said, pocketing the phone with a satisfied smile. Victoria stared at me, her face cycling through confusion, panic, and desperate calculation. Who should be here? What did you do? I invited some friends of yours to join our celebration. I think you know them, Marcus Thompson and Ryan Mitchell. They're both very eager to see you. The color drained from Victoria's face so completely I thought she might faint. Daniel looked between us with growing alarm, clearly sensing that something significant was happening, but unable to understand what. Dad, what's going on? Who are these people? They're your wife's other boyfriend's son. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. Around us, wedding guests had begun to notice the tension, conversations quieting as people turned to observe what appeared to be a family drama unfolding in real time. That's impossible, Daniel said, finally, his voice barely audible. Victoria wouldn't, she couldn't. I have 3 weeks of surveillance photographs that say otherwise, I replied gently. But you won't need to take my word for it. In about 15 minutes, you'll be able to ask Marcus and Ryan directly about their relationships with your wife. Victoria found her voice at last, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting my son from someone who sees him as a financial opportunity rather than a person to love. In the distance, I could hear the sound of gravel crunching under tires as vehicles pulled into the parking area. Right on schedule. Marcus Thompson's white pickup truck appeared first, followed closely by Ryan Mitchell's silver Honda Civic. Both men jumped from their vehicles with obvious urgency, scanning the reception area for signs of emergency. When they spotted each other, their confusion was immediate and visible. Victoria stood frozen beside me, watching her carefully compartmentalized world about to collide in the most public way possible. Showtime, I said quietly. Sometimes the truth arrives exactly when it's needed most. Marcus Thompson and Ryan Mitchell stood in the wedding reception area, both scanning the crowd with obvious concern, both clearly confused by each other's presence. They approached the pavilion simultaneously, their urgency evident in every step. Excuse me, Marcus called out, his mechanic's uniform wrinkled from his hurried departure. I got a message about Victoria being hurt. Is she okay? Ryan appeared beside him, equally breathless. I'm looking for Victoria too. Someone said she'd been in an accident. They looked at each other with dawning confusion, then turned toward the reception, where Victoria stood frozen beside me, her face white as her wedding dress. Victoria. Marcus stepped forward, his voice filled with genuine concern. What's going on? Are you hurt? And why are you wearing a wedding dress? The silence that followed was deafening. 50 wedding guests turned to watch as 2 strange men interrupted the celebration, both obviously familiar with the bride, in ways that suggested relationships far beyond casual friendship. This isn't, you weren't supposed to. Victoria stammered, her usual composure completely shattered. Ryan's confusion deepened as he studied the wedding setup, the guests, the obvious celebration. Victoria, whose wedding is this? You said you were busy with work projects, but this looks like... Gentlemen, I said, stepping forward with the calm authority of someone who had planned this moment down to the smallest detail. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Norman Walker, father of the groom. I believe I can answer your questions. I reached into my jacket and withdrew the manila folder. I'd prepared thick with 3 weeks of systematic documentation. Because I've spent the last month documenting this woman's lies to all 3 of you. Marcus and Ryan stared at me with matching expressions of confusion and growing dread. 3 of us, Ryan's voice cracked slightly. I opened the folder and removed the chronologically arranged photographs, holding them where everyone could see. March 15th, Victoria, with Marcus at Marcello's restaurant. I displayed the first image showing their intimate dinner in perfect clarity. March 22nd, Victoria, with Ryan at the Riverside Mall shopping for what appears to be engagement jewelry. The second photograph showed them holding hands, examining rings at a jewelry store display. April 2nd, Victoria with Daniel, my son, at their engagement party. The final image showed Victoria accepting congratulations, wearing the ring Daniel had bought with his life savings. Marcus snatched one of the photographs, studying it with the intensity of a man watching his world collapse. This is impossible. Victoria and I have been exclusive for 8 months. She told me she loved me. 8 months, Daniel's voice was barely audible. We've been engaged for 3 months. We've been dating for 6. Ryan grabbed another photograph, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and dawning horror. She told me she was single. We've been talking about moving in together. The revelation hit all 3 men like a physical blow. Daniel sank into a nearby chair, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, staring at the evidence of his wife's systematic deception. Marcus and Ryan stood together in stunned silence, processing their shared victimization. 21 days of systematic surveillance, I continued my voice, carrying the authority of irrefutable evidence. 47 photographs documenting a pattern of deception so elaborate it required military-level precision to maintain. Victoria made one final attempt at damage control, her voice rising to near hysteria. You don't understand. This is all taken out of context. I can explain everything. Explain what exactly Daniel looked up from the photographs, his voice hollow with betrayal. Explain how you were planning our wedding while maintaining relationships with 2 other men. Explain how you lied to all of us for months. Those relationships didn't mean anything, she said, desperately reaching toward Daniel with outstretched hands. You're the one I chose to marry. You're the one I love. Marcus stepped forward, his honest face twisted with disgust. Love, you told me the same thing last week. You said I was the only one who understood you. Ryan shook his head slowly, pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. All those times you canceled our plans. All those family emergencies and work conferences. You were with them. The weight of complete exposure settled over Victoria, like a collapsing building. Her elaborate deception, maintained for months with sociopathic precision, had been destroyed in less than 5 minutes by the simple act of bringing her victims together in the same place. Wedding guests pressed closer, everyone talking at once, the carefully orchestrated celebration dissolving into chaos and scandal. I think we've seen enough, Marcus said quietly, his dignity intact, despite his obvious pain. He looked at Ryan with something approaching kinship. I'm sorry we both got caught up in this. Ryan nodded, extending his hand. Neither of us deserved to be lied to like this. They walked away together, 2 decent men who had learned a hard lesson about trust and deception, leaving Victoria standing alone in her wedding dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her schemes. Daniel sat in stunned silence, still processing the magnitude of betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a maturity I'd never heard before. Dad, I owe you an enormous apology. You saw what I couldn't see. You protected me when I was too blind to protect myself. That's what fathers do, son. We see clearly when our children can't. He stood and embraced me, both of us, understanding that our relationship had been strengthened rather than damaged by this crisis. As the sun set over the wedding venue, I reflected on the lessons learned. Love requires honesty, trust must be earned, and sometimes protecting the people we care about means doing difficult things they won't initially understand. Victoria Sterling had underestimated the power of patience, systematic thinking, and a father's determination to protect his family. She discovered too late that some people can't be manipulated, some truths can't be hidden, and some consequences can't be avoided. The wedding was over, but Daniel's real education about life, love, and the importance of choosing partners wisely had just begun. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior. As I watched Daniel process the truth about Victoria, I realized that protecting our children doesn't always mean shielding them from difficult realities. Sometimes it means ensuring they face those realities before irreversible damage is done. 35 years of engineering taught me that structural problems don't fix themselves. They require systematic analysis, careful planning, and decisive action. The same principles apply to protecting family from those who would exploit our love and generosity. Victoria Sterling mistook kindness for weakness, patience for passivity. She underestimated the protective instincts of someone who had the skills and determination to expose her completely. But more importantly, she failed to understand that genuine relationships are built on truth, not manipulation. The wedding venue fell silent as the last guest departed, leaving behind scattered rose petals and the remnants of what should have been a celebration. But as Daniel and I walked to our cars together, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Martha's death, the deep satisfaction of a father who had successfully protected his child when it mattered most. Some battles are worth fighting even when the cost seems too high. Some truths are worth revealing even when they cause pain. Love sometimes requires us to be strong when others cannot be. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect someone you love? Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the strongest relationships. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about family justice and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Your support helps us continue sharing these important lessons about life, love, and the wisdom that comes from experience. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is the truth even when it hurts.